好，各位朋友晚安，欢迎大家来到在地实验。然后很高兴可以在星期一的晚上，这很特别的时间看到大家。那今天会为我们做简报的是 Nuraini， 他来自印尼。然后 Nuraini 在20年前，将近20年前，在印尼 Jogja 成立了Kunci文化研究中心，然后到现在已经20年了。那等一下的简报里面，Nuraini也会跟大家谈到说，Kunci 从创立到现在所做过的很多的计划。那Kunci 其实在印尼是一个非常重要的团体哦，因为他们不仅有理论的背景，而且非常重视艺术的实践跟理论的实践，然后同时也在这些理论跟文化实践上去做自我的辩证，还有做不管对于社会还是政治上的批判。那先讲一下为什么会由我今天来担任主持人。其实我跟Nuraini的认识大概是2-3年前，然后因为我在那个移民工文学奖担任活动的策划，然后当时我们就邀请了Nuraini当移民工文学奖的母语评审。那在那个时候Nuraini他跟我说他第一次看了100多篇印尼移工写的文章，然后也这个经验其实也连同在更早之前他在香港的 Parasite 做的一个公余 After Reading 这个 project 里面跟移工一起阅读一起创作的这个经验里去发展他接下来要做的艺术实践。好，那今天Nuraini的简报非常的丰富，他其实会除了谈Kunci在这20年来的经验，他也会去跟大家简单的谈他个人的研究，包括他的硕士研究，跟他即将在下个月要回荷兰去做博士论文的口试的研究，然后再来会有一个部分他会跟大家谈从1955年开始的亚非会议，一直到现在的整个在印尼发起的这种亚洲的研究、区域研究跟策展的经验，然后再来就是Nuraini接下来会跟大家谈现在Kunci在做的事情，尤其在2016年之后，他们有一个新的方向叫做 Turun ke bawah， 就是开始又更接地气的去下到田野去做很多的研究跟尝试。那最后Nuraini也会就他这一个多礼拜在台北的进驻去做反思跟经验的分享。好，那我们接下来应该1个多小时的时间会留给Nuraini做简报。那接下来的简报会以英文做进行，然后在简报之后也欢迎大家一起做 Q&A 跟讨论。好，谢谢。
Hello, everyone. First, I would like to say thank you to Ricky and Sima, who have been organizing my very short residency within the context of Nusantara Archive. I also would like to pay respect to all the elder of the Taiwan people, past and present. And in this presentation, I will share some exploration and finding during my residency in Nusantara Archive project. To frame the exploration and the finding of this residency, my presentation is basically about a series of methods, approaches, and perspectives to view the interrelational positions among those who inhabit inter-Asia environment, basically our own positions. And the focus is slightly diverting from my initial ideas that I proposed when I started this residency trip, I propose archives as migrants. And in that initial idea, I propose to use various insights emerged from various writings produced by migrant workers, Indonesian migrant workers, because I have been reading a lot of their works to guide my perspective of Taipei's urban landscape. But as the residency is progressing, I started to see another, like a possible way to document this trip. That is a series of methods for approaching positionalities in Asian context. There are many aspects and reasons that I use as points of departure here. My own experience in running Kunci Cultural Study Center in Yogyakarta, Kunci's programs, my own personal projects, and my observation during my stay in Taipei. And you will see later that in each point I try to draw key concepts and attempts to create methods or methods of sorts for approaching the dynamic movement and flows within the region. So first, I'm going to talk about Kunci Cultural Study Center. In 1999, at the time of the end autocratic Suharto era, my colleagues and I, Antariksa and I, founded Kunci Cultural Study Center. We founded Kunci with to place studying as one of our primary practices. In the early days, this included setting up a newsletter, distributing emails to an email list, and over time has evolved into setting up a library, doing formal collaborative research projects, and more recently, founding the School of Improper Education. These are some images of our early publications, Kunci newsletter. And this is a picture taken from Kunci's Instagram account depicting us trying to reorganizing our library. We study in various ways, and studying takes on a variety of meanings. In my talk, I outline the trajectory of our practices and explain the significance of studying in contemporary Indonesian society. I am making an argument in talking about Kunci here around the validity of studying in terms of working with and about the various communities that we occupy, contribute to, and benefit from. So in the early 2000s, we defined ourselves as an alternative space. We valued collective actions, self-organizing, and working together in producing culture. Establishing an alternative space, be it an arts organization or independent research group, has been a habit developed by a new generation of cultural activists in Indonesia, and as a model platform for moving towards our goals and developing ideas and visions. The articulation of new visions is an important element in the existence of these spaces. Our activities reflect the intensity of local cultural production in Indonesia and are partly encouraged by the urgency to express a long-suppressed counterculture movement. Practices of censorship and oppression didn't end with the Suharto era, but have taken on new and messy forms in the last 20 years. For those who are not sure how many of you are familiar with the Indonesia or Southeast Asian politics, but bit explanation about Reformasi 1998 or Reformation 1998, because you might hear that concept a lot during this talk. It is basically when the new order, Suharto's new order regime collapsed in the 1998, we embark on a phase that we call reformasi or reformation. And the collapsing of the new order regime is a condition that during the era we have been experiencing military oppression and then human rights oppression, all sorts of restriction in arts and cultural sectors, and it culminated in the monetary crisis in 1997, and then follow up by a series of long-term riots in Indonesia, in lots of cities in Indonesia, which then led to the fall of Suharto in 1998. So that's to sum up what reformasi is. And this is just a picture showing what now called as the reformasi hero of those political activists that have been missing, either killed or gone since 1998, and two of them are my friends. This is just a picture taken from a series of student protests in my former university in Yogyakarta, Gajah Mada University. This is still taken from the same visual archives, what happened in Yogyakarta at that time. So in many cases, an alternative space like Kunci grew out of something that initially may not be clearly be defined as space, but simply an individual or a group of people with the intention to employ the term for different social purposes. The meaning of the space is very flexible, depending on the needs of the context where it is situated. Before we had the physical space of Kunci, we were seeking to create ruptures in discourse and analysis and to facilitate new ways of studying together. It is useful to quote Melanie Budianta, a professor of the university, who depicts the climate of the immediate post-1998 environment as an emergency situation, and the cultural is to take place in the period as part of emergency activism. Their activities were conducted to fill in holes in the environment. I often feel that way in regards to Kunci. And at the same time, emergency implies short-lived nature of the activities. It's the kind of very fast activism which set to fill in certain holes with meaningful things. And some 20 years in the process of reformasi or reformation, we are still dealing with the remnants and legacy of the Suharto era. We feel that once a hole is filled in, there seems to be another or more holes appearing in a different social setting. Or rather, we feel that once certain holes have been filled in, we began to see other kind of holes surfacing from beneath. So I question here, what would one define a transient period that seems to last for a long time? We seem to live just to fill in holes, And perhaps it is the holes that define us, that define kunci. We assume different roles and responsibility. Is that something wrong? Okay. Okay. Yeah, I just keep going. Yeah. Yeah. And we assume different roles and responsibilities, often with hyperactive manner. And yeah, that's what I often feel in kunci. And in other words, we are actually just striving for life, maybe. And in a recent conversation with Gita, my colleague in kunci, she told me that I am part of the generation 98 who has the privilege of experiencing Reformasi in 1998 or Indonesian Reformation at first hand. As a political moment, Reformasi provided a source for new visions for many young artists, writers, and intellectuals. But instead of transforming into collective vision, it is also constantly being refracted. And for some people, the moment of Reformasi has already become like a myth, if not entirely forgotten. Our personal Reformasi experience becomes a privilege, at least for our generation, my generation, because it becomes very distinct memories which define who we are. And the memories turn into tools which guide our practices and functions, and our practices become the archives of our lives and purposes. And the nature of our spaces, a space like kunci is like, I feel like it's like a spillover that escapes from any form of formal institution. It takes different formats and scales. It works through organizing people and providing rooms to study and exchange knowledge. Our early self-published cultural studies newsletter, library, and mailing list serve as our ways of saying, just let's do something together and continue the conversation. And the conversation can be about anything or anything something. This is a concept that Kunci's librarian often say that I like it, anything something. The point is not to worry too much about the plan and structure. We find clarity as we go along with what we are doing. We make do with what is available. At the same time, I realized that kunci is also a byproduct of university system. It was born on the cusp of being the agent of change, in accord with the social imagination and escaping from the state agenda of campus normalization. I think that it was not being a student that was the most crucial to our development, but being in a university or dwelling on that university, provided many moments that, to follow Stefano Harni and Fred Moten, fugitive enlightenment. We nurtured our capacities for talking back. So in the case of Kunci, we make research because that is where the possibilities for learning about ourselves take place. And in doing research, we are excavating different narratives which are hidden or impossible to talk about openly. We navigate ourselves among the unfamiliar knowledge sources. In research practices, the function of our studying spaces goes beyond rooms to gather and extends into platforms in which we pose questions about our own history. When we envisaged the School of Improper Education, it was in 2015. We thought about the area, we thought about lots of things, and we thought about areas of priorities, which not only cover our works at Kunci, but also our own personal lives. We question whether or not we can make them balance. And at the same time, we had that question that I already mentioned earlier, that even though we are 15 years after Reformasi, but still, you know, everything seems like it's not there. It's not. We are not yet there, and we wanted to create a program which did not only articulate our intention to raise critical voices, but also it should be the one which embodies our willingness to study together. At the same time, the program should be able to be the medium where we can question the meaning of our collective. What does it mean to develop a collective like Kunci? What does it mean? Because 18 years has passed after Reformasi, and still, like, we felt like we have done lots of things, but we still grappled with what's around us at the same time. It seemed like it was getting even more difficult to explain the meaning of our practices. What is Kunci? It seems like very difficult question to answer. So the school stands as the tool for sustainability and questioning our ethical action. That's basically the reason. And more importantly, it should be transformed into a collective platform where we can go back and forth to the unknownness and embrace the unknownness. It is very important, I think, to value the state of being, like acknowledge that we don't know everything, because it makes it possible to reimagine the meaning of contribution and participation. That's the first thing that we thought when we started this school. We wanted to the whole hierarchical structure between the teachers and the student, you know, the usual domination structure that we have to encounter where we are in a school and environment. So this school based entirely on negotiation. So I made this kind of crazy diagram about kunci, and that is kunci. I'm starting to forget what's the meaning of yellow, blue, but basically that's what I thought kunci have been doing, you know, like space for critical thought, and then sharing, studying, writing, and then there is campaigns, vernacular education, library, transferring awareness, occupying loopholes, workshops, copy culture, and then we are also informed and shaped by other things as well. Like this is silence history, unheard voices, youth movement, empowerment, literacy movement, community. That is all the key concepts that you know, have been important, especially in the end of 1990s in Indonesia. So that's the whole Kunci's program is basically guided by this kind of question. So that's why when during the early phase of Kunci, we did oral history projects and then lots of literacy projects, history from below. And at the same time, this is the one with the yellow circles, is about struggle for reputation among, you know, like art scene. And then there is this skepticism. We want to value that a sense of skepticism, and then there is this competition for funding, and then conflicts with community, making money for ourselves, debts, we need to pay rent, and then sorry? Yeah, this is basically, and then this is 1998, and then I think this is like the line, and then this is like the starting point. It's very intuitive map. I don't know actually, but this is like kunci, and then this is like what happens in our ecosystem. You know, like the Sultan of Yogyakarta, university as habitus, and in other, yeah, another map talking about, yeah, so this is what happens after, you know, like we started to think about, we call it situated school at that time, not school of improper education. It has been gone through different namings, situated school. And then this is actually like how to create balance between what we want to do in kunci and how are we going to make it balanced with ourselves. So you can see there are whole like personal questions and as well as very elaborate questions about arts infrastructure and then environment, and then there is these things like the one in the blue circle is something that is new thing, like a new order as goes, and then the word communist that seems to be as a latent danger even after reformasi, and then voices, it's very important, and then the fact that it is still being repressed in a lots of ways, and then corruption, and Jogja that seems to be decaying because all of this, you know, environment damage, and then I question whether the voice of the Sultan is also the voice of the people, and then land conflict, which is a big thing in Indonesia at the moment, like big problem, and this is so this is like a new question, like self-governance, and then we want to, you know, unlearning, and then experimental, critical pedagogy. This is like the new things that we want to do, and then so situated school is basically a school that is at the intersection at lots of things. Especially it's born of the very chaotic thoughts, and then it's more like I remember this. This is more like a very I think this is no, Taipei is not here. Oh yeah, yeah, there is Taipei. Talking about the topics, basically. Oops, what happened? Keep talking. Yeah, so basically the school is divided into 4 phases. So I'm just going to say like very basic ideas, and each we developing this school to run from 2016 to 2019. So this is the last year, and each phase is allocated to experiment with a specific mode of pedagogy. There are 4 models of pedagogy being experimented in the school. First is we are taking from Joseph from Jack Rancier's book, The Ignorant Schoolmaster. And whereas the Rancier encouraged us to dismantle the idea of the teachers as the leading figure in the class, and then propose the possibilities of creating a learning environment where situation between the students and the children do not know anything about certain subject. And then the second phase is about Turba. I heard Sima mention about that. Turba is an abbreviation of turun ke bawah. It's an Indonesian word, turun ke bawah, or literally translated into getting down to the grassroots. It's a work method formulated by the institute or artists and cultural activities activists associated with the Institute of People's Culture in the 1950s through 1960s. And at that time they are closely associated with the Indonesian Communist Party to incorporate learning from the people element in doing art. And the reason of why we are using Turba or getting down to the root is because we think in a lot of ways people, the engagement between arts and the people has been a legacy of doing arts and cultural practices in Indonesia. Whether or not you say, there are lots of concept and ideas, but basically the question of engagement or participation or contribution to the community is something that is very, very close and very closely related to arts and cultural practices in Indonesia. And then the third method that we are doing is now in this phase in Kunci in Yogyakarta is nyantrik. It's a Javanese word. It's basically a common method for learning from the masters practice within the local art community. It's like learning from the master. I know that within an art school and environment, it is also quite known, but it is special because nyantrik is a practice that is very much associated with the Javanese culture as well, whereas the master and then the students, young artists, are usually staying in the same house or in the same sangar. It's like a, I don't want to use the word alternative, but it is like a space to learn about art, but developed by an artist, and usually it is in an artist house, and then young artists usually stay there and live together, and then just to continue. This is basically another. Oh, something is wrong with that. But basically, this is what we think when we think about school. You see, there is this first phase, and then reflection, and then continue with the second phase, and then reflection, and then so that's what we call like going back and forth between situated methodology. So this between theory, concept, and then this is because in each phase the participants of the school to other places to experiment with this project, with their own project. I don't know whether I have more time to elaborate more deeply about what I think about in each phase, but in the first phase, basically we I would say that we let ourselves to get lost. We try to grasp the idea of knowledge as something that is uncertain, but more resembles as an effect, which leads us to something certain. Yeah. So the participants, for instance, the participants of the school spend some periods of time to live in different communities in and around Jogja. And knowing means going into unfamiliar spaces of learning, which includes the willingness to let go some of our privilege. So that's what we mean by getting down to the roots or going under, meaning to let us being exposed with new kinds of precariousness. So the question is, and that is the question that we've been asking ourselves while we are doing this kunci, is how should we define the knowledge produced from a growing sense of precarity. So that's we are sort of guiding by that question. And I won't elaborate more deeply about LECRA, but just to give you more sense of why it is the question about the relation between art and people is important in Indonesia, is because we have also something that called kuliah kerja nyata. It's basically work practice. It is a mechanism usually practiced at the university and environment. And it is, so the implementation of this scheme is basically a student assignments during the final year in the university. In this scheme, the students are required to go to a village, certain village, and the idea is to get them exposed with the real world. That's the phrase that often used in the universities in Indonesia, to the real world. And it is top-down requirement. It is very different with the sense of doing turba, going under, that we've been doing in kunci. It's a very top-down because that's part of the requirement to get a degree from the university. It's like maybe it's like a military service or something like that. This is like a community service that each student in the university in Indonesia has to do that. And I think it is very important to try to connect the relation between turba and this the practical work, because it demonstrates an effort to often establish education institutions to experiment on a certain mode of contribution to a broader public. So basically, each student will go to a village to do practical work, to provide like a very useful contribution. And Gajah Mada University, my alma mater, and also the alma mater of many people in Kunci, has been a key proponent of this practice in Indonesia. But I know that now maybe not all universities in Indonesia practice this practical work. But I want to go back to to the intention switching positions between the artists who are doing turba and the people who live in the imagine under. when talking about this practical work. In this practical work, the student status and then the formality of university as an institution where they belong are regarded as having superior position toward the people who live in the village. The students come to unfamiliar remote areas with an intention to teach something. And or if teaching is not the main activities, the students are imagined to give something or to fix something. That's basically what we do during this practical work. And in this practical work, students are positioned as the giver because they are imagined to be more knowledgeable. So that's how we parting ways between Turba and this Kaka, and even though we are both dealing or working with the people. And just I want to pick up a couple of notes from the reflection of the participants of the school of improper education, because we just published a book, reflective notes, compilation of reflective notes written by all of the students, and I wrote an introductory essay in that book. Interestingly, even though we are not regarded School of Improper Education as an alternative school, but many of them refer to this school as an alternative school. But of course, given my my personal history, I always refer to this School of Improper Education as a kind of alternative school, because I was matured by having gone through a specific learning experience in the 90s where alternative attached as a main character. And I think in retrospect, perhaps alternative appeared as a word that seems more apt to define us, generation 98 who also gave birth to Kunci. We like using the word alternative because often we are unable to find other words to define marginalized spaces or rooms with flexible, fluid, and resilient elements at the same time. We like using the word alternative to refer to everything that is maybe growing wild, while nurturing the capacities to adjust to certain condition. Alternative also refers to something that is strong and unbendable, but it might also be open to uncertainties. Another concepts or thoughts that emerge in this reflective thoughts is below, which means a connection, possibilities to travel, and as a frontier. In Turba, for instance, going under, learning also means the willingness as well as courage for taking different routes for understanding and environment. And we are talking a lot about precariousness during this second phase. Precariousness which means different thing, but it can be a condition which position outside feeling secure, to feel precarious, to feel insecure, and often within the school participants, precariousness is regarded as feeling very uncertain about work and income, but also about talking about precariousness because they see the gap between work and then the imagination of time between the people that they saw that they live together in the village, and then talking about knowledge from below. So the end of Turba, the end of the second phase of the school basically brings forward like more questions rather than fixed understanding of how much knowledge that we can get from doing this. And the locations of going under appeared as a meeting point where conflict or long-term anxieties feels even more profound. But at the same time, it also serves as a resource for new anxieties as well. Yeah, so that's about the school. This is some photos taken from, while we are doing this school. So, and then I just going to say very briefly about this after work reading club. And so after work reading club is a series of reading sessions that we conducted with a group of Indonesian migrant workers in Hong Kong in 2015. And it culminates in the publication of anthology called After Work Readings, short stories. It's an anthology of short stories, poems written by migrant workers. It's not that much different from the publication of Brilliant Time, the Taiwan Literature Migrant Award, actually, but maybe something that is, like why we do this is because we realize that we are not, Kunci is not a collective of researchers or artist researchers that focus on migrant workers. That is why when Parasite in Hong Kong approached us and asked us to, develop a project related to migrant workers, we said that we're just going to do our way. and at that time we already read, not a lot, but we read important texts written by Indonesian migrant workers that based in Hong Kong. And so we started to develop idea to work on literature. But again, Kunci also is not a collective that focuses on literature. But we intentionally adopted literary works as our entry point because they open up wide possibilities for shared interpretations. And we use that point, that works as common ground for discussion, for shared interpretation. We think that because we don't know a lot about literature, and maybe these migrant workers also, they so-called amateur writers, we would approach this project on a more equal footing, both being non-expert readers in the field of literature. And so that's why the After Work Reading Club began. But I'm going to explain or elaborate more about how we do it. And we wanted to engage with the notion of fiction, not only as a fiction, not only as a form of work, but also as a side of the struggle for recognition beyond identity politics. It's like a methodology and also a structure of thinking. So it's not only literary style, but something that goes way beyond that. We use fiction, and we use a concept by an anthropologist, Kamala Visweswaran, fiction as a narrative strategy, which can represent subtle moments of contestation within the process of subjectivity construction. And then there's also something, of course, that is very, very known concept, rooms of one's own, as argued by Virginia Woolf. But in practicing reading, or in encouraging reading as a practice to these migrant workers, is also a commitment to render time as meaningful, because for many migrant workers, not only in Hong Kong but also in other places, including in Taipei, to go somewhere means to work. It's only work, and then they have to carve their own space, their own sense of space and time. And then to encourage reading means to encourage them to steal the time between all this obligation to work, and then to steal the time is very important. And also at the same time, by practicing reading, we want to emphasize the meaning of reading as something that is, not an obligation, but something that is has pleasure, something that is pleasurable, something that is fun, reading for fun, not reading for something like because you have to read because you have to write something, but just reading for fun. And also, of course, writing comes as a cycle from reading. And by doing this, we want to also emphasize the intellectuality of, we want to disrupt we say this, we want to disrupt the established concept of intellectuality, that again, the writing of Rancière, The Knights of the Labor, is very important, that where he argues that the production of writing by the workers is a condition of displacement or disidentification that should be considered as an important political actions. So it's not only writing when it comes to writings produced by the workers. And also the necessity of reading as a non-productive gesture, because if you are working as a worker, you are conditioned to, your body and everything. It has to be targeting to, being productive. You have to produce something, and then reading seems like a more small rebellious act, because you sit down and then you read something, and that is why it's very important. We are talking about, we can talk about this from so many different angles, because we can talk about the whole capitalist mode of consumption that govern everything, and then we ask how if we ask ourselves and then other people to practice non-productive gesture. Some pictures from the what we did in Hong Kong. And this is the book. Yeah, I think it's also available at the Brilliant Time bookstore. And yeah, this is from Sima. Sima gave me the image because the book, it's very thick because it's translated into 4 languages. There's an Indonesian and then English, Mandarin, and Tagalog, just to follow the composition of the migrant workers who live and work in Hong Kong. And then I think Sima wrote us one day and said that the Indonesian part of the book was used to as a reading, sent as a reading material for the Indonesian inmates in Taipei jail. And then that is actually we are this is also a moment that allow Kunci and also me to expand our intellectual and activism networks with other people outside Indonesia, because I think that was the first time we got to know Sima, and also Sima introduced us or provide us with lots of knowledge about Brilliant Time and then Taiwan Literature Migrant Award. And then I had an opportunity to become one of the jury members of this Taiwan Literature Award for Migrants in 2017. And that is, I think, it grew into a possibility not only to read so many works produced by the migrant workers, but also the possibility to develop the archives of the migrant workers' writing. And yeah, so this is, some findings, the products of the Taiwan Literature Award for Migrants. And then not immediately have a direct relation to the whole methods that I want to present here, but I think it has. This is my PhD project that I will defend soon. It's called Commons People Managing Music and Culture in Contemporary Yogyakarta. It's about musicians, visual artists, music collectors, fans, curators, and cultural activists participating in the popular discourse of music through relevant music activities. So basically, this is about these people with some of their music-based plans and activities. And it also narrates the implementation of the plans and initiatives takes place in Yogyakarta, Indonesia. And this is actually during the process of doing this that I conceptualize a lot of things like alternative space, and then the school of improper education, and a lots of things. And this takes place in an urban media infrastructure setting. And I employ self-organizing, collectivism, and institutionalization of cultural production as useful concepts to define the alternative, what I call alternative milieu. It's the milieu which shapes the production of tools and ways of organizing a series of action on managing music, culture, and life. And I propose commons as a lens to see this. Music, which also serves as a commons, emerges as a horizon of possibilities or a means to be managed and maintained for different purposes. And I also propose sustainability as shared imagination of what doing music and culture means. So this is, the whole dissertation is basically about the articulation of this imagination, the imagination about commons, that is sense of security, sustainability, and documentation. And again, this is going back to archiving. And other concept that I think is, or method that I found is revolving around publication, translation, and migration. And I do this through my own personal project that I'm currently working on with my husband. It's called Reading Sideways Press. I want to situate this very small press within the context of Melbourne or Narm in the Aboriginal language, to come to terms with the various tensions of dispossession, cultural production, and the interweaving of all these dialogues. And our small press is very precarious and very vulnerable, but perhaps this is, I think, presents more opportunities rather than being, like a condition to be feared. And through doing this small press, I want to acknowledge that I am an uninvited guest on the land called Australia. Then I may be benefit from the outstanding and unreconciled acts of dispossession, but being in this position only enhances the importance of doing something to contribute to this land and its many nations. Whereas for Andy, my husband, this small press maybe is a way to acknowledge that he is also an interloper in the land of the Kulin nation. And every day while working on these translations in our fledgling publishing house, we are benefiting from dispossession and colonization. Turning to Indonesian fiction should not make us forget this. So we are a small press that is dedicated to Indonesian fiction, arts and literature, and also sports culture. Feeling more comfortable and fluent in Indonesia can make me assuage one aspect of my sense of displaced Anglo-ness in Australia, but it doesn't bring me also closer to coming to terms with the sovereignty of First Nations people in Melbourne and the absence of treaty, let alone other daily injustice. We seek to make Reading Sideways Press with a twin strategy of looking to our own backyard, having a holiday to stretch. If you know Afrizal Malna's work, that's a very important Indonesian poet. And looking towards in Indonesia, which is also a process of becoming. I wonder what role an engagement with Indonesian literary culture can play in the decolonization of our imagining of Australia. To have holiday means to occasionally travel outside our home in order to absorb different feelings embedded in nearby social environments. It also means to move in and out our familiar space and to try to think about the politics and poetics of stories production in related contexts. We have the opportunity to travel for work or leisure, to cover great distance by plane in short time, or to reach closer destinations but through slower means, perhaps by using train, car, or walking. Changing our mode of travel or transport and making the journey slower offers another opportunity to feel the geography of a place through listening, feeling, and coming into contact with others who may otherwise avoid by virtue of being inside our own private space of a vehicle. The word holiday seems appropriate to articulate the meaning of doing translation for our work. The products of translation works fit many points and are exchanged during a certain process that, to follow Jennifer Lindsay and Maya Lim, can be defined as cultural traffic between countries, nations, peoples, and languages. Translation caters to the global demand to consume and listen to the voice of the others. If we are to translate texts from Indonesian to English, we should also reciprocate the generosity of the Indonesian literary canon. What can we give back to the readers of Indonesian? I wonder into what kind of English shall I translate the works of Afrizal Malna and others. Should it be the pseudo-British English or Anglo-Australia, or should it be the rambunctious, rough and raw language as apparent in a novel of Melissa Lukashenko, Too Much Lip? Privileging a formal grammar school language is one further act of cultural displacement. Reading Sideways Press is situated in between Australia and Indonesia, and it is partly founded on the base of our mobility power. Sometimes we leave home to find work, at others because of work. We often use the word pulang in Indonesian, meaning to go home. But where we pulang to ranges from Yogyakarta, where I live and work, when in Indonesia, to Surabaya, the place where I was born and grew up, to Melbourne, where I currently live and stay with my family. While cities such as Amsterdam and Leiden, and where I spent years of studying in the Netherlands, and Adelaide in Australia, also provide some of the comforts of home and the warmth of the process of pulang. While going for a holiday is to take a break, find an occasion to breathe fresh air from the claustrophobia of urban life and everyday rituals and patterns, we consider taking holiday as a moment and possible conceptual framework to inform our vision of what kind of small press we should become. To go on holiday is to take time. Often this means to steal time again and to go somewhere. We sneak in something, some kind of sensory or critical experience in the process. So translation here does not only aim to satisfy the desire for understanding a cultural context through reading materials, but in using translation as the main reference for our small press, we seek to move it away from being a mere tool of cultural production. We reimagine translation as a political site in order to pose relevant questions about histories and context. We ask about what is left that we can do, and to what extent we can respect the stories of the others. To illustrate this, our translation of Arista Devi, an Indonesian migrant worker in Hong Kong, is one such case. Arista is an Indonesian domestic worker in Hong Kong that is also a prolific writer, but at the same time, her works are not usually acknowledged as a representative of Indonesian literature. To translate Arista's work can be regarded as an attempt to present a new voice, but our efforts seek to go deeper than that. We are seeking to disrupt the representation of Indonesian literary works maintained by the established gatekeepers. So that's translation implies the standard practice of transferring one text into another language. Translation, however, offers opportunities for shifting one project to another context, from Indonesian to English and the other way around. Is perhaps too easy formulation of our role as a translator. More challenging and more pressing is how to translate a colonizing perspective point of view into decolonizing imagination of language and literary practice. Having a holiday or going home are two ideas which inform and challenge our practice translation to contest a standard of translation based on bringing the classic of one language into another. This is just an example of what we have been doing. This is my zine called Domestic Notes. The second volume of my zine. And this is another method that I found, and I realized that this has been gaining currency, especially among within those who are engaged in arts and culture. Is this 1955 Asian African Conference or Afro-Asian Conference, Bandung Conference. It's basically a congregation of newly independent countries at that time, 29 countries. It's very important to bring this up since the idea of creating like a pen, Asian African pen, has been rediscovered and then reimagined by many people in the art scene to understand their own contemporary society. It's just a collection of this thing, and then we can have a discussion. And then another method that I found or approach is Inter-Asia Cultural Studies. And of course, this is important to bring this up in the context of Taiwan, because Inter-Asia Cultural Studies both as a journal and a movement was also born in Taiwan. And long time ago, in 2002, makes me feel very ancient. We organized this Asian Studying Asia. So again, I just realized that it's very, like a continuation between so many efforts and attempts to create new concepts or approach about our own position in Asia. And we had this conference that we called Asian Studying Asia in Yogyakarta. And I remember that that was also, we started to become a member of Inter-Asia Cultural Studies journal, or as also a community member of Inter-Asia. So we need to use this as a very important point, actually, trying to seek so many different things that we can pinpoint. And at that time, we, as a speakers, there's me, Antariksa, co-founder of Kunci, and then Melanie Budianta and Kwan Sing Chen from Taiwan. And this is just my new article in that journal. And I don't know whether you have heard about Equator Festival, but I think this is very important. Jogja Biennale for a decade from 2011 to 2022, we are organizing a biennale centered on Equator. So we are using Equator as a standpoint to view the way we view the world and environment. So the first Equator, so the idea is the biennale will be in Jogja, but in doing the biennale, we in each year we are seeking a partner from the countries who position in the equator line. So in 2011 we had India, as a partner. And then in 2013, we had Egypt. And then in 2015, we had Nigeria. And in 2017, we had Colombia. And so this year, this will be called Ocean Biennale, because we will involve countries in the Pacific Ocean and Australia. And then next in 2021, a country in Southeast Asian countries, it has not been decided yet. And then it will be concluded with 2022. It's very important. I haven't thought about this since yesterday, but I thought this is, like a point of view that needs to be spoken about here. And then another is, this is a project that one of my colleagues in Kunci has involved in. It's called Ambitious Alignments, New Histories of Southeast Asian Art. It's basically a research program developed by lots of universities in Southeast Asian region, and also I think in Australia as well. It basically brings together scholars and art historians from Southeast Asia to chart the complex, very complex trajectories of artists and people and all these artworks which shape the art worlds in the context of Southeast Asia. But they only focus on a specific period of time, as far as I know, from 1945 to 1990, because that is the period where the majority of the countries in the region struggling for democracy, and so the focus will be in the geopolitical conflicts and tensions in that time. And another, approaching the end of this presentation, I'm talking about ethnography, the idea of artists as ethnographer, Asia as method, and then studying turn and collective tooling. I think perhaps due to my education background, I keep thinking about ethnography, because I'm trained as anthropologist and always at the anthropology department. And the fact that I am here in Taipei and maybe in other places where I get other invitation, for instance, always trying to make sense of everything in an unfamiliar environment, and facilitated by this global movement. I always want to reflect on time allocated by, I don't know, like different various subjects, my research subjects, or everyone that I met, and everyone that has been so generous for engaging with my own questions or curiosities or conversation. And I want to think about time more than as a practical space where the interpretation of facts and truth takes place, but I want to see it as a moment to ponder about position in the research and collaboration. I would like to consider what an anthropologist, Anna Singh, proposes in the following, that the point of ethnography, she proposes, is to learn about a situation together with one's informant. And at the same time, I also want to consider Clifford Geertz's idea of thick description and fieldwork as a site of knowledge production to advance the meaning of ethnography that goes beyond just a useful tool as a research method, but I want to perceive this residency, whether it is short or long, as a kind of fieldwork as well. And it has many points or many stages where social observation and critical reflection can be transformed into shared understanding and shared knowledge. In the age where traveling and mobility characterize artistic expression, collaboration becomes a very essential element in contemporary cultural production. And in the context of art, traveling is usually referred to under different names like exchange, residency, research residency, fellowship, or fieldwork. And doing residency has gained more currency as it is regarded as an important medium to develop character, personality, or contemporariness of an individual art practices. Of course, we know that there has been this, growing idea of research-based art or artist researcher that has informed the current development of visual art discourse in a local or global context. And maybe you have also aware of this idea of artist as ethnographer by Hal Foster, very, very a bit outdated at the moment, but it is, I think it is useful also to bring that up, artist as ethnographer, and also the idea of, the author as producer by Walter Benjamin. I keep thinking about that, and then this kind of residency is partly made possible by a condition where artists and other types of cultural producers are very accustomed to global collaboration. And in doing a global collaboration, we travel and dwell in a new social environment. I understand that, even though it's a bit outdated, that the artist as ethnographer has served like a major catalyst for a paradigm change, I think, in art perception. But traveling to a foreign place should not be undermined as an act which emphasizes our unfamiliarity. Rather, it should be a practice which entails an incorporation of research as an essential aspect of art production. But I guess I want to move beyond the meaning of traveling within every residency as just a medium which enrich the individual practice. And I want to illustrate that through a case. So this is a research project that Kunci is now doing. It's called Studying Turn. We use tiny tuns in Phnom Penh in Cambodia and Arte Moris in Dili in Timor-Leste as our study cases. We choose tiny tuns and Arte Moris because both are alternative spaces which also functions as an alternative education places. But it's very different. It's very different things. Tiny Toons is like an NGO that is not usually, those who are in visual arts will not see Tiny Toons as something important. Usually, it is like an alternative school for kids. Street kids, they often refer to street kids, but as a matter of fact, those who are the students of Tiny Toons are also the migrants who have been living in Phnom Penh legally or illegally, and they are from the neighboring countries of Cambodia, from Vietnam or Myanmar, that ended up in Phnom Penh, and somehow they cannot get access into a public education system. So that's why they go to tiny tuns. And in tiny tuns, it's very basic things that they teach: English, Khmer, and dance, math, very basic. And then Artemoris is it's like an alternative space in that sense for young people who live in Dili. And because Timor-Leste is still a very young country, Artemoris transformed into a space like a pioneer in visual art, who provide visual art education for young people in Timor-Leste. And it is very, to be able to travel to Cambodia and Timor-Leste, I think it means to encounter various possibilities for studying together with Tiny Tuns and Artemoris while examining their studying practices, because we can then make connection between Tiny Tuns, Artemoris, and what we are doing in Kunci with School of Improper Education. So here, doing residency or doing research, studying serves as a method and research framework at once. Studying can be a new way for imagining a contemporary geopolitical constellation between Cambodia and Timor-Leste. And I also want to move away from seeing Cambodia and Timor-Leste as the places strictly defined by a colonialized map. I intend to see their practices as well as Kunci's practices in the process as a new way to reimagine how we can coexist and relate to each other. I also think about other scholarly works to engage with the possibility of such new methodology, like Asia as a method, for instance. It means to cease to look at Asia as object of analysis, but use it as a medium to rediscover and transform the self. And in conducting this research, various findings during fieldwork will be referred to historical experiences and vernacular practices which can be developed to follow Kwan Sing Chan again as an alternative horizon or perspective, and seen as a method to produce and transform the existing knowledge about ourselves. So I guess in this notion is an attempt to use like different localities in Asia as point of reference to deepen the shared understanding and create future productive collaboration. So that's why I also refer to this research project as an opportunity to create a collective tooling, which means a process where a research is steered towards the production of collective knowledge rather than being a project for examining selected cultural projects. You know what I mean? Like because both of us use this as a tool that we can use together. So that's why I define that as also like a collective tooling. But this is partly half serious, half not serious. I invented this new concept called Flanner's Wanderer. Well, usually Flanner, you know, of course, the Walter Benjamin, but it's always like white male wandering about, and then here I try to use Flanner's like woman, Flanner or wanderer, and then I've been envisaging this thing since So last year I was in Kathmandu for facilitation, doing a workshop in a workshop called doing visual politics with a group of students from Australia, and I have 20 students in the group, and the topic of that group is studying about Nepali migrant workers. And then, of course, none of us know about, none of us very familiar about Nepal or Kathmandu, and let alone Nepali migrant workers. That's completely new thing. And then, again, this is the whole question about traveling and then, experiencing new thing, and then the desire to create a method, and then, creating a sense of, or a mode of immersion. Like if you are in a new place, you have to create something to, creating a method of what you should do to do this. And then, so this is, of course, this is derived from ethnography, but it comprises like a series of things like walking and situated reading sessions, field trips, taking notes, meetings, or encounters, meetings people, taking a pause, producing archives, and then repeat the next day, following in new directions. This is, taking a pause is a new addition that I make while here, partly inspired by acts of the Indonesian migrant workers in the park while they are working, but also they are taking their akong or oma to the park doing work, but also they are doing live video call or establishing connection. But yeah, pause, but also keep doing work. And yeah, so that's field trips, taking notes, meetings, taking pause, and then producing archives. And I found another thing. So I went to Mocha for an event, the Theater of Art Histories, and I realized that this is actually, like another addition of methodology. That even though it's very, very conventional, but it makes sense. It is again, if we want to create a sense of positionalities, we always want to take notes and compare, make a comparison between the place where we are now and other places, comparative. And then I want also to pay attention to other things, not flows, not scapes, not comparison, not taking notes, but also historical climates. This is something that a strong sense that I got when I visited a New Cultural Movement Memorial Museum. There's a sense of course, I always want to compare notes or doing a comparison between what happened in Indonesia at the roughly at the same period, 1930s, 1940s. It's bit the same, but also different at the same time. But there is this whole offer, or like an environment. The climate is the same. That is called a movement, or like you do something. There is this a very good book by Takashi Shiraishi. He's a Japanese scholar focusing on Indonesia and Southeast Asia. He has this book called An Age in Motion, Popular Radicalism in Java during 1930s to 1950s. And I think it really, the whole book is like the whole museum in this museum, but with different thing. This museum is about Taiwan, and then as a whole, and then that book is about Indonesia, but it's the same thing. It's like the age that is in motion. One thing that I particularly interested in is this record, the Dance Age, because it very much reminds me of music or song written by Sukarno, the Indonesia's first president. Sukarno was also a president, but he's also an artist as well. Actually, it's very interesting to compare these two, or at least when I saw the Dance Age, it immediately reminds me of Irama Lenso or Lenso dance, because this song was born 1950, 1940. Let me check. '50s, and it is very much represents the whole idea of Indonesian character that had been shaped by Sukarno at that time. You know, the anti-rock and roll attitude that stemmed from the anti-rock and roll attitude, because everyone thought that if you are being a nationalist, that you should listen to Indonesian music. And it's the whole country is shaped by this whole discourse of what it means to be Indonesian, and what it means to represent Indonesia. So that is the very high time, where a period where nationalism is shaped from the inside as well as from the outside, various forms of cultural traffic. We have this cultural missions abroad, cultural organizations, expanding networks, and at the same time, we are also very anti-neocolonialism and imperialism, and there was a strong call for returning to the originality, Indonesian, the original Indonesia at that time, and we want to create the very authentic Indonesian culture, and we are very much against everything that is imported from the West. So that sums up the whole idea of the cultural traffic in Indonesia in 1950s. And he said this in the very famous speech that Sukarno delivered to commemorate the Sumpah Pemuda Day, or the National Day of the Youth Pledge, in Surabaya in 1959. He said, why don't young people today develop our national culture? Why do not you protect our national culture? Why do you show more love to cha-cha-cha, rock and roll, and ngak-ngik-ngok songs? So he's very against Western imitation. And to close this, I'm thinking about translation, copying, and also appropriation as probably a useful method as well to understand Indonesia and Taiwan. You know, like the possibilities to create like a music commons or musical resources that contain songs that has been translated back and forth from Indonesia to Mandarin or the other way around. And then there are also many songs that from that originally was written in Japanese and then translated into Mandarin and then appropriated into Indonesian, and then so this whole very chaotic appropriation, cultural traffic, it's very useful method as well. And I think I want to close this with this question. So yesterday I went to Taipei main station. I hang out for a while at the library set up by the Brilliant Time, and then had a conversation with some Indonesian migrant workers and try to grasp a sense of what does it mean to be in that station every Sunday, and then the fact that this whole migrant workers discourse has been source of research and knowledge as well for so many people. And I saw how they talk, and then usually in small groups, how they actually often separated also from each other. And then I went back and thinking about, so what does this, you know, whole thing lead to? This whole thing of the idea of creating a shared sense of understanding, and then connectivity that has been performed through so many different formats by lots of people, not only in the arts and cultural field, but also scholars, academics, talking about connectivity and different kinds of studies, but what does it lead to? And then talking about the ethical dimension as well of doing this. You know, I also reflect on that, how easy it is sometimes for me to travel, and then almost always by invitation to go somewhere and then to do things, and lots of things that I'm very privileged to do that, and other things that other people cannot. And thinking about ethical dimension of doing collaboration, and then thinking about, are we leading to solidarity? And if so, what kind of solidarity? And what does that mean? And also, or are we leading to friendship? This whole thing, you know, this whole traffic, incessantly southbound policy. Like, I don't think, like, it's very much easy for Indonesian artists or cultural activists, for instance, to travel to Taipei because of that. So, are we leading towards like a friendship? And if so, then what kind of friendship should we become? So that's yeah. I don't know. I'm also not able to provide a very clear answer. That's the big question that has been, you know, hovering above me, and also my other friends in Kunci as well, because this is our recent discussion. It's about this. But maybe I would say that for my own personal take would be, I think I'm still thinking about the idea of creating fast activism and slow activism. And, activism, which means that you do things because you want something very quick, like advocacy, or doing something that where the answer is very clear and then the solution seems to be very clear. But I think I'm very much favoring towards very slow activism. Something that is very slow, small, but very persistent and very resilient at the same time. So that's and in each way, maybe in the case of migrant workers, for instance, we might, like Kunci, we might not be able to provide a very deep understanding of everything, but it actually has proved to be an avenue where we can expand our intellectual elaboration, this whole thing. So doing research means this. And then solidarity can also mean probably to keep doing this, and then to accompany a lot of things that we meet along the way. I think that's my take. Thank you for listening.
Okay, thank again, Nunin. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, Nunin, as a cultural study researcher, yeah, we can see how she tried to communicate with the society, and not only with her academic background and also her practice in the field. And the most important thing for me, yes, I know, she tell us how important the art and practitioner should examine themselves, yeah, and always to talk about the ethical issues. And so after Nunin's residency project in Taipei, and she revealed all her experience. Yeah. Since yeah. Okay. And after this, she also questioned herself and what she see in Taipei and what she experienced in the field. So I, including the two questions, yeah, what kind of solidarity and what kind of the friendship? Yeah, I always thinking about that as when I get along with my migrant workers friend there. Yeah, I'm always thinking about why they tend to get together in the Taipei main station, and yeah, maybe just including that's why our friends want to join this event tonight. But when we talk about the relation, yeah, we need to think more about the relationship, a relation between the individual to an individual and the person with in the community, or with the nation, or more widely political issues. So I think, oh, and by the way, I need to explain what kunci means. Is there anyone know kunci means in Indonesian? Kunci means key. Yeah, the key, 钥匙. So yeah, I think it's your obligation to find the kunci because the kunci, yeah, because this afternoon I asked Nunin what is the function of Kunci Cultural Study Center, and yeah, I think the function is to open up to discover and to explore the world. Yeah, so yeah, you need to do this all your life. Okay, do we still have time? This last 3 minutes. Okay. So after this part, yeah, we maybe